Water, a source of life and death. Across the world, dark legends rise from rivers, lakes, and seas, spirits drowned in sorrow or thirsting for vengeance. These are the top 5 water ghosts from around the world. Number 1, La Llorona, Mexico. They say she drowned her own children, then herself. Now, when the river whispers at night, it's her voice you hear. People near the Rio Grande speak of a woman in white, pale, drifting, crying. But when you turn to comfort her, she vanishes, or worse, she reaches for you. A child once followed the sound of weeping. He was never found, only his shoe, soaked and torn, lying by the reeds. No matter the country, the myth finds a new river, Guatemala, Colombia, even Japan. She waits by water, hungry for grief.
Mis hijos.
If you hear crying outside your window tonight, do not open it. Do not follow the sound, or she'll make your sorrow her own. Number 2, Mount Makiling, Philippines. Mount Makiling, a name whispered in legend. They say a guardian spirit watches over her forest. But some say she no longer guards. She waits. She watches. At night, the lake shows her reflection, but it moves without her. She walks into the water, but the reflection remains behind. Villagers say if you see her in the water, you're next to follow her down. Some say she was betrayed. Others say she drowned herself. But the lake remembers. The water never forgets.
They say she guards the mountain, but the lake chooses who stays.
Number 3, the River Witch of Kilkenny, Kilkenny, Ireland. Kilkenny, Ireland, the quiet town where time moves slower and the river never forgets. Beneath the mist and ruins, something watches, something waits. Some call her a legend, others never dare say her name aloud. In the year 1347, a woman was accused of witchcraft by the village priest. They said she hexed the crops, cursed the livestock, but the truth was simpler. She refused to marry the barren son. One cold night, they dragged her from her home, bound at the wrists, barefoot, and bleeding. She was thrown from the old stone bridge. They didn't speak her name. They only listened to the splash and walked away. Her body was never found. Days later, the river changed. The water turned still to still. Fishermen heard crying beneath their boats. Children claimed to see a pale woman beneath the surface, eyes wide open, watching. At night, dogs refused to cross the bridge, and if you listen closely, you hear her voice, calling from the reeds. No longer human, no longer dead. In 2017, a cyclist passing through Kilkenny at midnight stopped to rest near the bridge. He saw someone know, something floating above the river, long hair, drenched clothes, her head tilted slowly, and her glowing green eyes locked with his. I couldn't move, he said. She wasn't standing. She wasn't alive. His dash cam footage corrupted. His bike found the next morning, wheels still spinning. Locals know the signs. Birds falling silent, mist rolling upstream. They leave offerings by the river, a lock of hair, a whisper, but they never, ever call her name. They say if you stand on the bridge too long, you'll feel her watching. You'll hear her drowning all over again. And just before you turn to run, you'll see her beneath you, eyes open, waiting. Number 4, the Drowned Bride of Tigris, Baghdad, Iraq. Baghdad, a city of dust, memory, and shadows for centuries, the Tigris River has carved. Through time itself carrying stories, secrets, and sometimes souls. Beneath the drifting fog and broken stone, someone still waits. Long ago, on her wedding day, she waited by the river. Her groom never came. Some say he fled, others say he drowned on the way. But she waited, dressed in white, flowers in hand. When night fell and hope turned to despair, she stepped into the river and never returned. They say the current swallowed her grief, but not her spirit. And every night since, the bride returns to that same spot, looking, searching, mistaking strangers for the one who left her. They whisper about vanishings near the river. Fishermen, children, travelers. No struggle, no sound. One moment they're there, and then they're not. All that's left is something small. A shoe, a phone, footprints that stop at the water's edge. And always, just before it happens, they hear her, a soft lullaby, a woman crying, calling a name that doesn't belong to them. Fishermen swear they've seen her face. In the water, eyes wide open, veil drifting, a pale figure floating just below the surface, or worse, reaching. They hear whispers when no one is near. They see lights flicker on boats with no one aboard. One man said he saw her walking, just above, the river, never touching it, and when he blinked she was gone, but his boat never made it back. They call her the Drowned Bride of the Tigris, a curse made of sorrow, loss, and waiting. She doesn't care who you are, only if you'll stay when the others left. The river flows as she watches still. A hidden map, uncover what's meant to stay buried. Number 5, the Salted Woman, Algiers, Algeria. Algiers, Algeria, a city resting by the sea, where fog rolls in like memory. Beneath the waves and between the broken stones, a woman was buried by salt. They say she was the storm the sea couldn't drown. The first to see her were dock workers, a pale figure, soaked to the bone, standing at the edge of the morning, her dress dripping, her eyes hollow. They say she didn't speak. She only stared. Some turned and ran. The rest vanished in the days that followed. Long ago, a storm rose without warning, drowning ships, destroying nets, and swallowing men. They blamed her, called her cursed. She was beaten, bound with ropes and nets, her mouth stuffed with salt, and they threw her into the sea. But the sea didn't take her, it returned her. Now, when fog creeps over the water, and you taste salt on your lips without reason, she walks again, through stone, through waves, through silence, screaming without sound. Her breath is the wind, her presence like the weight of drowning. The locals know. They leave the docks when the mist grows thick. They shut their windows. They whisper prayers to a sea that doesn't forgive, because she's still there, waiting for someone else to carry the salt where she once sank. If the air tastes of salt and the sea falls silent, don't look back. She's already behind you. You've seen their faces, you've heard their stories, but remember, water never forgets. Subscribe for more haunted tales.